right? At least in the session, everybody is given the same treatment, and the board timeout is up there, whoever it is, because we are trying to run on time, unlike the last time. Right? So we have extremely interesting session right now, which is on social entrepreneurship. The kind of skills which are required for social entrepreneurship are completely different from a normal startup entrepreneurship thing. I know this because when I came back to India about 8 to 10 years back, my passion was about leadership, my passion was about democratizing leadership, and it was about how do you really transform each and every individual in those rural villages to leaders. And if leadership is just about a defining moment, if leadership is just about a decision which you end up taking in that defining moment, rather than talents or legacy or communication skills or leadership skills. And I found out the hard way that the kind of skills which I require in running a non-profit, in running a social enterprise is completely different. And unfortunately, I was not successful, though I tried to run it for about 3 to 4 years, and I kind of made a seamless transition into a for-profit venture, and I found that I'm okay. Right? So we have a great session right now, and few great panelists. So our panel moderator is Wilma Rodriguez. Wilma is a former journalist who worked with several years with the Times of India Group. And currently she is running an NGO which is called Sahas, which is primarily into waste management. And he was adjudged as the best social entrepreneur by the Namma Bangalore Foundation. Welcome, Wilma. We do have Professor Gupta with us. He's a professor at the Center for Management in Agriculture at the IIM Ahmedabad and the founder of Honeybee Network. He's primarily into social entrepreneurship. He's into micro-entrepreneurship, helping formal enterprises mingle with informal sector, helping set up a knowledge economy. Welcome, sir. We have Shoma Bakre, who co-founded Empower Research, and she is the founder of Let's Do Some Good Foundation, which is primarily an advisory into the CSR space. We have Naga Prakasham. I love the way you have defined yourself as a farmer growing startups. He's a partner at the Acumen Fund, founder Native Angels Network, and an MBA from San Diego University. And he is primarily an angel investor. Over to you, Wilma.
We need the mic. Yes. Okay. We just pass the mic around as and when we need it. So it's so good that social enterprises and social businesses have a place today in a session like this. So really, we're very happy that we can have this discussion. I just wanted, since you know a little bit about us as the panelists, I just wanted to quickly find out whether the audience has, what kind of entrepreneurs we have in the audience. So are there any entrepreneurs here at all? Okay, that's great. And any of you in the social business space? Oh, great, that's even better. Yeah, so right now, really social businesses are, India has so many problems to solve. Yeah, so it is therefore something that is growing. But if I can, come to our panelists and Shoma, ask you. Today a lot has been talked about, the fact that problems are being solved, social enterprises, all of that. But if you look at mainstream businesses and the fact that, today businesses also are creating at least livelihoods to a large extent. So how would you describe really a social enterprise? How would you differentiate a social enterprise from mainstream business?
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me here in this panel today, and I'm very privileged to be sitting with folks like Professor Gupta and Naga here. And I'm actually a newbie in this space. So I was a commercial entrepreneur. until very recently, and I'm now a social entrepreneur. In terms of what is social enterprise and how do you define it, you know, there's a very thin line between commercial and social entrepreneurship. Both require the same things. So if you are a commercial entrepreneur, you have to run a business, you have to have solutions, services, products that you have to sell, you have to raise money to start your business, you have to pay rent, you have to pay salaries, etc., etc. Nothing is different for a social entrepreneur. If you're running a social enterprise, you have the exact same things to do. So I think there's a very, very thin line of difference between the two. Most things remaining the same. A social entrepreneur essentially tries to find solutions to problems and opportunities that exist which are unmet so far, the needs that are unmet by government or by the marketplace. And what they try to do is use innovation to come up with solutions that will bring about sustainable, scalable, solutions that will change society in certain ways, right? And it doesn't matter whether what they are generating is social return in terms of impact on number of people, or in terms of quality of life or whatever, or money. But both sets, whether it's social enterprises or commercial enterprises, are doing the exact same thing. Commercial enterprises will always target revenue and profit. Social enterprises may or may not go for revenue and profit, because monetizing what social enterprises do is always not possible. So the space I work in is with migrant children, ultra-poor slum children. So I consider what we do a social enterprise, but can we ever monetize that? No. We pick these children up from the slums and we make sure they get an education. We make sure that they get to a stage where they're employable and they can generate livelihood and break out of the cycle of poverty that they're born into. So we are providing invaluable service. But can we monetize this? No. But are we not a social enterprise? Well, I disagree. I'm very much a social enterprise.
Yeah, but you know, the thing is that if you looked at businesses traditionally, 2-3 centuries ago, a business was always meant to be for public good. So today, somewhere, probably that has changed, because today businesses are looking at shareholders and profitability. But today now also social enterprises are expected to run as for-profit business models. So now I was just wondering if you can kind of share with us also, given the fact that today startups, and India is known to be one at the forefront of a lot of startups coming up, where do you think is the space, and is there a hope that we may have more such social businesses, the motivation for young people to also start social businesses? What in your experience would you like to share with us?
Yeah, quickly is, I categorize Indian startups overall today in 3 categories. Right? The first category is this copy-paste. So what's happening in elsewhere in the world, just start writing a business plan, right? Which has also become a trending sector, where you this on e-commerce or the IoT or false. There's a second category is where people are looking at the problem around, trying to solve that and bring in some element of technology that might work in this condition, like localize the versions of it. I'll give you a few examples, right? So I think Wilma is a great example as well. I was talking with Professor about how this campus is pretty clean. So thanks to Wilma, right, the entire waste is managed by Salas. So it's a great model of how she was an NGO and where there was a potential to form a for-profit version. So today, we've invested in Wilma's company. That's one of my best performing venture, because we have a lot of waste. There are 5,000 tons Bangalore is producing every day. You do the math. So my waste is also coming out. So my waste should not be subsidized. So there should not be a donor money spent on managing my waste. So that is the premises that she's running at it, right? But if you look at this kurta, right, this is made in like Sevagram, right? So there is an organization called Go Co-op. So he put up a site which is doing only mostly B2B and B2C, only artisans, right? Cut all the middleman, so that India has like 24,000 cooperatives, right? And 53,000 crore business. But at the end of the day, we were losing a job, end up in a slum in cities, because there is not viability. So that's the premises he put. So there is no traders, only artisans. Today there are 4,000 cooperatives online. So this kurta from Khadi, you could buy directly from the artisan, you make it yourself, or you do a bulk order, right? So we're working with the B2B. So Levi's going to start a Khadi line. We're going to buy 1 lakh meters of Khadi. So this is very interesting about how they're looking at this problem. At the same time, there is this viability as well. So we usually call it as, we look at triple bottom line. People, profit, and the planet as well. But I think there is a pressure, it's always, that's what we're talking, Professor, as well, that the way equity investment is happening in these ventures, sometimes there is a mission trip happens, because the equity investor makes money when you scale. So when you start not able to grow, but there is a mission trip happens. What you started out with, you may be moving out. So that is probably a potential risk that you need to look at, if at all, if you are becoming a social enterprise for profit, and what kind of an investor you are taking in, when you take the money. Because if you are taking money from the investor who has this mainstream agenda, then he's going to push you towards this scalability element point. So another example, like agriculture, this is one of the biggest problems today, 50% of the country employed in agriculture, which is not viable, people are committing suicide. So this venture today in Bangalore, which directly buys from produced from the farmers, and a vehicle was made, an electric vehicle, so with the help of NID. So this is to leapfrog the country from fossil fuels, right? This electrical pushcart vending. So that directly goes and sold to the housewives. So there are 15,000 pushcart vendors, right? So this is to help them. And directly buying from the farmers, that is also going to help them. And this is not stopping at there. Then comes the data. So today, if you look at, suddenly the tomato price goes up, because there is a lot of people in Madanpalli maybe growing tomatoes. So they dump it because there's no price. But what happened next now? They slow down because they won't start growing all tomatoes, the price goes up. So they're playing the supply demand game, gambling, right? So today when OPEC, if the oil price goes up, they can close the tap, but not a farmer. So this is a problem. So we are going to look into the data, right? What Bangalore consumed, 2,500 tons of veg. So can we take this data back to the farmer about, okay, Hassan, you grow this much. Hoskote, you can do this much. Even at some point, right, if the price is not viable, they can just not even cut the tomato for 2 days. So leave it there. Let the price come down so you can bring it down. So this is where what a social enterprise, an entrepreneur is able to go look at deeper in this problem and trying to solve. But it is all the triple bottom lines is there, right? There is a profitable venture because look at 2,500 ton is consumed in Bangalore. It is just controlled by 4 or 5 mafia in scare market. So that is the disruption that's happening. 15,000 pushcart vendors are the one moving most of the veg. So you help them as well. Then go to the farm gate so that cut the middleman, there's a better price. So it has all these elements. So I'm very optimistic about number of entrepreneurs like this coming forward. Even in IMP, we have NSR Sal, who's a partner here. So we are on 5 companies working in agriculture. So I'm really impressed, few of them are our own alumni. Like earlier, you don't see them, they end up in McKinsey, right? But I see a guy, he said, I will come back, I want to work on agriculture. They started doing pretty well.
You're saying that the profile of people coming into the social space is also the IMB graduates, the people who would generally go otherwise into mainstream. But Professor Gupta, one of the things that the feedback that we get about social enterprise is that there still is a tendency for us to be not really solving the problem in its entirety. For instance, Bangalore generates 4,000 tons of waste per day. Sahas manages about 30 tons of waste per day. So how can we as social enterprises be relevant in the kind of solutions that we are providing? Should we not, you also in the morning commented that not all solutions or not all businesses should really scale. But in that case, would it not be then defeating the purpose in terms of, getting to the bottom of it?
How do we scale? Do we create a network of Sahas? 100 Sahas in Bangalore. Each one doing 30 tons. It becomes 300. 100,000, it becomes 3,000. So question is, should one organization scale up? Or should we have a network of small, distributed individual leadership driven organizations. Because social enterprises are very passion driven organizations. They're also individual centric to some extent. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should not decry the fact that there's a soul which motivates and mobilizes social capital and goes out and does something. What wrong with that? After all, you're doing it for fun, you're doing it for enjoyment, you're doing it for your swantas fire. Why should you're entitled to have all the fun in your life that you deserve out of that enterprise. So I think we should not rush that. But that also means that the opportunity for others to grow in your enterprise may not be as high. So some of the people who want to grow at faster pace than your organizational permit should be allowed to splinter and become a partner, franchisee, if you may say so, or even a healthy competitor for that matter. I think we have not realized the whole range of options that we have of scale. We are restricting ourselves to one very narrowly defined model of scale. I should grow. That's only one way. There's so many other ways in which scaling can take place. So that's one suggestion I would make, that we should hesitate. I mean, the network would not have grown if our organization is very small. Srishti has only about 35-40 people. We are in 70 countries. China has the strongest network outside of India. 6,000 innovations from 30 countries to China we could get. I didn't have anybody in China of my own organization, so to say. Yeah, the University of Finance and Economics, there was a professor who took interest, came to join our Shodhyatra, started that. So I'm saying that I strongly believe in network, shared economy. I strongly believe in distributed leadership. I strongly believe that we should tame our goals and keep them in limits so that we can let other leadership emerge. So please think of scale through a shared future, a shared economy, a shared leadership model, which will definitely provide variations of the theme there. So, I was mentioning at the time that in my book I mentioned technology is like word, institutions are like grammar, and culture is like physics. That's the way ecosystem of innovation emerges. Culture is giving variation of the theme. Let us create a shared culture of sharing our experience so others can do better than us. And if more models emerge for solving this problem, that's number one. One more suggestion I would give is that too much of discussion on social enterprise is focused on urban metropolitan youth. What are we assuming? We are assuming that students in IMA and IMB are more competent to become social entrepreneurs? Certainly not. Certainly not. Because they always talk about the opportunity cost of loan they have taken, this and that, and we will have to recover those loans for a few years. Some people go not because of us, in spite of us. They had the seed before they came to our institute, and they could have somehow overcome all the temptations and go. We shouldn't take credit for that, except make it already. So there are a lot of people in large or small towns, in villages, who are great social entrepreneurs, who are having limited resources, and out of them they are sharing a very large part of society. They never figure in the discussion of this kind, unfortunately. For example, a teacher reads the opportunity column in the newspaper, writes a letter to them. Very sorry to hear that so and so died. Would you like to plant a tree in the memory of so. He has sent about 74 letters. If 10% of them grew, 7,000 trees he must have planted just by writing a letter to those who have had some very good impact. Great idea, isn't it? Isn't it social enterprise? The user is not paying anything. He's not recovering the cost of planting tree from anybody. He's not distributing seedling. There's a driver in Madurai, just on the same thing. He had seedlings in his garden. He kept them in the bus, public transport driver. When people got down from his bus, intuitively he will judge who is the right person. He will hand over a seedling to them. Please take it, grow it in your house. Next time you come in the bus, let me know how is it going. That's it. Every day, he had a quota of 25, whatever number of seedling he could manage. He would offer it to the people who are getting down on the bus. Great social enterprise. We have large number of such examples in our country. But unfortunately, we are so focused and so much of our energy goes into only some kind of enterprises. She mentioned about financial. Now, naturally, if you need mentors for those children, you can't afford to hire them. You just can't. And each child deserves a mentor. Someone for whom that child is called, quote of first call. If I'm not able to get some way through, I need to call somebody. And this mentor will ensure that the child, like his own child, is able to access that person anytime, every time. That's a big task, but that's worth our energy. Now, whose organization is that? Is it them? You understand? Each inventor should feel that it is their organization. We have to make them feel this. So I think large number of enterprises where you need to build upon a network approach to sustaining them. We need to learn to share leadership.
Yeah. So I actually want to, make a point here. Exactly what Professor Gupta said. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So exactly what he said is what we're trying to do. To go back to the first point, again, the difference between commercial enterprise and the social enterprise is that in the commercial enterprise, you're always kind of trying to build competitive advantage against players in the market, right? You're always trying to outdo their competitors. In the social enterprise sector, we need to collaborate and reuse what is already there. We need to cut down wastage, we need to cut down duplication of effort. And that's exactly what Professor has said again. We work as a network, we have 70 organizations, we are about 2 years old. 70 organizations, corporates, NGOs, funding agencies, academia, and everybody coming together to solve the problem of out-of-school children, and we started with Bangalore, right? And why do we need 70 organizations? Because one is giving health, other is giving nutrition, third is giving curriculum, fourth is giving funds, and that's how we want to cut short the cycle time that it takes to get out of this rut of illiteracy. And you know what Professor Gupta has said has just validated what we are trying to do, so thank you so much.
Wonderful. I really feel
But to come back to you, Professor Gupta, the fact is that today we do need, and we're talking about enterprises as business models. And we're seeing that in a business model, revenues come to some extent from people that have to use the services. And so we are seeing that, people are not really willing to actually pay for services that traditionally were available to them for little or at nothing. And yet, that becomes a big part of our business. So also if you look at government, in its thinking, looking at the fact that today a startup is one which is a technology-based startup. So do you think, and have you worked with policies to also enable, this kind of ecosystem where even social businesses will have access to, funding, to resources, to grow their businesses so that they can also expand and, accordingly make that impact?
It's a very good point, very important point though. Because the people who believe social enterprise are defined by their ability to recover the cost and plus do some good is a very narrow definition of social enterprise. So I think what you're saying is very valid, and there are also social enterprises where user does not pay for services and goods that they are getting. Somebody else pays for it. Somebody else maybe through donation, somebody else maybe through cross-subsidization, that you have some services for which you charge if you are providing Texas tutoring, online teaching. So those who have more money pay for the service, whereas those who don't have, get it free. Those who pay are paying for others. So there are many such models. All of us, in IIM campus, get a bungalow, live in a house which must cost at least 50,000 rupees a month. If I were to take it in a city, garden, what all luxury that I can imagine, sanitation staff coming every day to clean the toilets and everything, and it's cross-subsidized, grossly subsidized. Subsidies are bad, not for professor, but for everybody else. But this is the hypocrisy. Professors of IMA or IIMs, enjoy tremendous amount of subsidies. Alright? And we write about criticizing those policies and public programs where some subsidies are involved. I think as a professor, it's my duty to expand the space for such enterprises that you mentioned. And I would also say that we should take a little more to writing to the policymakers. So Niti Aayog, everybody sitting here should write to them about your views on what kind of startup policy they need to have. They are very flexible, comparatively speaking, compared to others. But in this flexibility, they need to include what you just mentioned. So I agree with you that those enterprises where cost recovery is not taking place from results, but their quality of service was very high quality, such that gaps in public service delivery are being bridged by those enterprises, say public health, education, tutoring, stopping dropout rate by providing them coaching, etc., etc. Government should be able to subsidize them. Private sector ventures to be able to subsidize them. In fact, we should argue for a policy whereby high net worth individuals, if they contribute to such enterprises validated by some incubators and networks, they should get tax exemption on that. So ideally, I used to get tax exemption. I can entitle to my savings in certain kind of security. Either we create social bonds, which will then subscribe and pay for some services. So those bonds, when I pay for those bonds, I get tax. And through those bonds, we finance. The rule is not here for me now, but we can help us in constructing these bonds. And finance people can help in getting such financial instruments through which high net worth individuals either pay directly or through these bonds, buy these bonds, which are no return bonds. Their capital only comes back after 10 years. Then lockup period is about 7 years or something. And return on the interest on those bonds pays for these services. Something of that kind can be done. So I think this is a very creative field for future innovations of fiscal policy instruments innovation. And this is an area where there are students and professors sitting here kindly do work in this area. I strongly believe that we have a lot to contribute to this area, so that more and more social ventures can come along. But I agree with you completely that this is an area, fertile area, potentially very viable area, which will bring the goodness of our society together and convert.
Yeah, we are also, today the discussion is also on success and the secrets of success of an organization or a social business. So Naga, have you looked at the experiences that you've had, and how would you define success in terms of a social enterprise? Impact versus scale. I mean, just like to hear from you.
Right. I think I'm going to talk just about this social enterprise. People get confused about for-profit and not-profits, right? So I'm talking about the for-profit version, right? It's venture. It's called social business. So it is kind of mixed, because in a social enterprise, the way we define the social business is about procuring a product or service from a low-income family, or you provide a product or service to a low-income family, right? That's our major term. If we take this kurta example, right? The weavers, they're struggling to make their ends meet. How do we make sure that they're getting a better margin? Their livelihood is protected. Or agriculture, help the farmers, right, to be part of that. So similarly, people providing services to that. There is this husk power in Bihar, right? So there is no electricity at all. So they utilize this rice husk thrown as a waste, take up the technology developed in Indian Business of Science, and provide the microgrids. So they run their own lines. A local village runs a power plant. It's a 90 kilowatt power plant. Every day, 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, the power is guaranteed. It is run by the local person who is a micro-entrepreneur who is running it, right? So this is where the definition comes. Let's come back to the success element. So if you look at the investment vehicle, the funds that is funding in these kind of ventures, also going to look at funds from their, what we call LPs, the people investing in these funds. So it depends on the theme of the fund, the success is there, right? So some of these are all pure play profit. The people say I'm a venture capitalist, but my segment is different, right? I'm going to look at numbers at the end of the day. How scalable, how's the revenue, how fast this person is growing, because unfortunately in equity model, an equity investor makes money the moment you scale. If you don't scale, he doesn't get your money. So there is a pressure on looking at that element. But there are funds which will have a mixture of it, right? There is a triple bottom line, what we call, like profit, people, and planet. So you put the line, which P comes first. So you are not able to provide profit that level, but your impact is so awesome, that's great. And also the investor, what we call, is a patient capital. So in the mainstream, if somebody is investing in these kind of ventures, there's expectation of return maybe 5 years, right? But ventures invested in these categories, there may be longer gestation period, right? So there's a patient capital. The investors are patients for getting their returns back. So the success, end of the day, will define by the business plan, what it talks about. Am I providing electricity to these many people? or am I touching this many number of agriculture or the farmers? If my revenue grows up, automatically number of farmers that I'm touching, it's going to change. The second part is also we have to look at very seriously about what we call the fair trade. So the moment I say procure product from service from a low income family, then you spend too much on marketing, right? And you put probably shops everywhere, and what do you squeeze on in the production side? You squeeze the farmers for your produce values, you squeeze the weavers for the handloom, whatever they are making. But if you build the DNA there, that, okay, this is the price, no matter what, that's going to need to go to this farmer or this weaver, and you build a business plan on top of it, then comes your fair trade. So we also should be aware, the consumers, right? We end up bargaining for 50 bucks, right? And so this is where that element comes. If it's a fair trade organization, if it is providing this much of revenue potential back into the producers, then there is another way of looking at it. Otherwise, what happens, that's what I mentioned about the mission drift happens. So you are growing and you're spending too much time on marketing, so you're just putting all the Bollywood people's come on advertisement, right? Because when they tell you drink Boost, you drink, right? When they just wear this donut jeans, which is pathetic, like only the poor people wear. But Shah Rukh Khan says you wear, but it costs. Right? Where the cost is going to come, it's going to take from you. So there has to be an understanding of this consumer as well, that are you proud in buying what are you buying, right? Are you just blindly believing what the Bachchans are saying, or you're going to leave the label and then say, who's this weaver working on it, right? The produce, where it's coming from, which farmer is getting benefited. Can I give this premium to this product so that this farmer is getting a better price? So this is what I would look at if all these elements are put into this venture, if they're able to true to the cost. Not change because there is some pressure around growth, there is some pressure about profit. You don't give up your vision about what you want to support, because that impact is higher. Definitely, I think that's where the number one should be.
Thank you. So I think we just have about 10 minutes, so we can do a little bit of a Q&A so that some of you have questions, maybe 2 questions or maximum 3 questions that we can take. Anyone? Yeah, maybe we can start with
Professor, so if you look at the work of Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, who talks about capitalism being the quintessential driver of entrepreneurship, or even Adam Smith, who spoke about invisible hand. So when we talk about for-profit corporate enterprises, we declare that capitalism is the way to go, and if everybody works on their self-interest, things settle on a long run. Now, why should we have a completely different matrix when we look at social enterprises? And would this come at the cost of efficiency and scalability? Because isn't scale and social enterprise is a paradox? And most enterprises...
Have you ever stood under a tree while walking on the street in Bangalore when it started raining?
Yeah.
Who planted that tree?
My assumption is government.
No. And who paid for that tree? It's some people. Why was that tree not cut all these years? Why was it not dried up? Why was its roots not filled with concrete? Who took care that this tree was pruned sometime if necessary, if it was completed? There's a lot of public goods which we have created, some individuals have created, and which have made our life better. Each one of us sitting here has availed of these public goods or entrepreneurs as a case. And yet, when it comes to contributing to creation of those goods, we fail to realize the impression of the transnational capitalist model. So please understand, if you look at goods theory, public goods, private goods, common goods, all goods, various kinds of goods, why do we have different kinds of goods, and why have these goods being created in a manner that different people pay for different categories of different quantities of goods? Correct? So the question that arises is that at no time in future and at no time in history did we have a situation where everybody was rating of certain categories and differences were paying. There is nobody in this room who are not aware of services and goods for which he has not paid. All of us have availed of services for which we never paid. could have been a public library or it could have anything else. So please understand that there are limitations of what markets can do. There are limitations of what state can do. There are limitations of what civil society can do. And there are spaces in the intersection of these texts which remain uncared by anyone, by itself. That is where the need for hybrid organization is met. So therefore, the future social enterprises will have to fill up those niches which are left somewhere or other three. For example, when we did a study, IT person had defined A50 goes back to talukas of Gujarat. The workers, most of who are there. There were not many NGOs in those blocks. Markets were absent practically a week. State was also weak. Now, there are regions in our country where all the three are failing. Market failure, state failure, civil society failure. What to do? What do we do? Do we let them become insurgents? We spend 40,000 crores every year to fight people of our own country. You understand? Indeed. Insurgency provisions. 20,000 crores every year, about 25 districts of southern India. So please understand that the cost of not catering to certain unmet needs through some viable means, and viability not necessarily being achieved by leaders, is the huge public expenditure in keeping order when law is not obtained. Entitlement of those people is same as ours and yours, and yet they don't get those services. The qualification for a school teacher in many tribal regions is 8 months. We didn't send to teach your children or your brother or sister to a school where the private school teacher is only qualified up to 8th class or 10th class. So there is a huge degree of discrimination in society against those who are disenfranchised for whatever reason. And social entrepreneurs of some kind or the other are trying to fill this gap. It is about 70 organizations have come because not because they are affected by these children directly, they don't study so much. They will become either hooligans or they will become some rebels. Or both. Depends what kind of destiny they have attended to. If they become violent, the cost of security guard in your private house will increase. Understand? Instead of one shift, you have to have guard for 3 shifts. So the absence of a social security transfers into private cost. That's a capitalist model. Those who can afford to secure themselves will secure, those who not will be looted on the street. So please understand that it is not as simple as it is. It's a little more complex. And if we do not take care of this inclusive way of developing, we actually are transferring the cost of access of market and state supplies to those who are the poorest. And since they can't afford, they become alienated. They become alienated, they become angry, they become angry, sometimes they become violent.
Last question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Manish. I've been hearing about everything out here. We also talk about CSR, that is corporate social responsibility. I see a vast gap between the private social entrepreneurs like you've been out here, and also the subsidies which has to be given by the government. That's number one. Number two, every corporate who is earning more than 100 crores, they have to shell out 2% of that. But the irony is they do it for themselves. I'm sorry, that's what the fact is. How it can be blended in a better way where so many social entrepreneurs can come out. There are many people who are willing to do that job. But yes, definitely, like Mr. Naga said, for profit he has been talking. Definitely, there are venture capitalists who will fund for profit. But who will fund for non-profit? Who are doing they're more who want to give back to society. So is there a possibility of that blend to happen, or it will never, or it will be like this only?
So I think to a certain extent it's already happening with the mandate of the 2% spend. Corporates don't have a choice but to scout out good projects that they can support. What is it? And in the 70 organizations that we have 6 major funders who spend their CSR money on exactly what they're trying to do, which is, as I had pointed out, it's a non-profit venture, right? But it is a venture notice. Now, the point is that we have a deficit of an ecosystem that promotes social entrepreneurship in India. I'm not so aware of what happens abroad, because the government in the West plays a big role. In India, we have a deficit, but there are corporate houses that are trying to fill the gap a little bit. One very recent example I have is, the Tatas. Through their foundation, they started supporting something called the Foundation for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Social Entrepreneurship. And what they're trying to do is to incubate and handhold social entrepreneurs. They scout out the best that they can get and take them from the lab to market journey. Through the entire journey, they are supporting them, including getting them seed fund, mentoring, everything. The lab testing, everything is done by them. So I think, it is happening, but it needs to happen at a much faster rate, because what Professor Gupta said is, the unmet needs, if you try to look at them, they are huge. The cost to us of that is huge. And one of the questions I keep on hearing, even now when I go to corporates and I'm talking about what we do or what social entrepreneurs do, is, why are you doing the government's job? Why are you doing this? There are funds, the government has policies, they should be educating the children, why you? And my answer is very simple. We can wait for the government policies to kick in and let this fester more and breed hooligans and anti-socials, or put a band-aid for now with whatever limited means and resources we have as a collaborative network, and wait for those activists and the policymakers to actually implement those, while we try to retard the regression of this phenomenon further.
I have just 1 minute,
Just
sir.
one small information that there is also a concept of future social not just corporate. Each one of us getting salary of some kind from somewhere. Muslims में एक बड़ा अच्छा concept है ज़कात. 10% of income.
Zakat.
Large number of Muslims allocate for a public good. And it's a wonderful concept. I say to those wise people in their religion who have sort of institutionalized it, they have created non-profit bank, they have a non-interest bank, they have also created whole range of Islamic banking system, contributions of various banks. I wish we would do something of this kind in other cultures. I wish we would have a quota of 25%, 10%, whatever we think is really possible. Allocate that fund.
So
Then, हमारे यहाँ पहली रोटी जब बनती है ना भाई, ये वो रोटी understand है?
Yeah,
पहली
guy.
रोटी जब बनाते हैं तो वो खाते नहीं हैं, वो चिड़िया खिलाते हैं, गाय को खिलाते हैं, दूसरा खिलाते हैं. There is a concept in our culture that before you eat for yourself, you allocate some part for others. Others not just human, non-human beings, animals, birds, ants. लोग आटा लेके जाते हैं, जहाँ चींटियों के घर होते हैं, वहाँ आटा डालते हैं. I think it's a great culture in that respect. Somehow we are not bringing that culture back to our daily life. I would wish that we also reflect not only corporations should do, they should do what they are doing better and so on, fair. What about I as an individual? I pass some part of my income out to go for that.
So the CSR, you said like last year there are 6,000 crores went in, right?
Yeah.
So that has been, this law is relatively working fantastic, right? Because there's many of these aid agencies were sent out by the government the moment we joined G20. So that's where the CSR law came in, the 6,000 crores spent on. In IMB we just announced the incubator for non-profits. Because what we're seeing is the 6,000 crores went in, but some non-profits are really big. They know how to kind of put together a fantastic presentation and all, but a lot of people doing great work, they don't speak this corporate language. So that's our goal here, that we're going to incubate some of these good people doing good work and give them streamline, bring the efficiency and all these elements so they can go and tap into some of these resources as well. Yeah.
So, just one last statement,
I
sir.
think we have to end. We've had a great session and we've also kept to our time. I think so far the time has...
It's great, actually.
So I would like to hand back to you. Thanks, Professor Gupta, Shoma and Rada.
National business editor of Hindustan Times.